Do you remember this from Saturday Night Live?
And now send in my little cush ball, Jared Kushner.
You're unbelievable.
Jared, I've sent you all around the world to represent me, but no one's ever heard you speak. You're like a little Jewish Amelie.
You know, it's amazing. In the time, that guy went on to shoot somebody on the set and kill him, Alec Baldwin, which I didn't see coming. And also, I don't think people saw coming the Abrahamic Accords. Jared Kushner joins us now, and his new book that is out, Breaking History, a White House memoir. Hello, Jared. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you for having me, and thank you for reminding me of that SNL skit. That was quite funny.
I mean, they really hammered you. At one point, they put you in little short pants, and I don't know about you. I think you, but based on that response, feel the same way. When they first started mocking me on Saturday Night Live, I thought, wow, I've made it somehow or another. Even if they're making fun of you, that's great, even better. But how everybody said, Jared Kushner, how could you possibly send him to the Middle East? We've been trying to crack this code for 80 years now. And yet you did. Can you talk a little bit about what you write about in the book, about how you crack that?
Sure. Well, first of all, it was definitely a challenge that when we got involved, I don't know, maybe they thought I couldn't make it any worse than all the professionals who'd worked on it for decades before. But what I did was I went there, and I write about this extensively in my book, how my first year was really spent just listening. I was meeting with all the different leaders, and I was asking them questions, which they actually had a hard time processing at first because they were so used to not having these questions asked, which is America has so much power to influence things, and we've done some things that actually have made this region much worse. If you were in my shoes, what would you be doing? And finally, it got to really interesting conversations, and I listened to everyone's point of view, and I really realized that peace is about the future, and that you have to get people to focus on their joint interests. Let's put everyone on the same side of the table. And then there were certain patterns that became very clear to me that were contrary to what all the conventional wisdom was. And there's one example I give in the book where I was meeting with one of the great foreign policy academics who's well respected, and I laid out for him my approach, and I said to him, well, do you think I have a chance of succeeding? And he said, absolutely not. And I said, why so negative? He said, Jared, nobody's made any money betting on success in the Middle East in the last 25 years. So I like that you're bringing new ideas, but you just have no chance of being successful. But ultimately, I think by building strong relationships, by thinking outside the box, again, I write a lot in this book about President Trump and my interactions with him and my interactions with all the world leaders. We took a fresh approach. We tried to be empirical. We tried to be pragmatic. We saw things for what they were. And again, we were ruthlessly criticized for the approach we took in the Middle East up until it worked.
So in the book, you talk about David Friedman, and he's a bankruptcy lawyer in Manhattan. And he suggested, and you guys decided to look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict like a bankruptcy. So can you explain that? And is it that you guys were not, Council of Foreign Relations, years and years at the State Department, that you came from a business background and had a totally fresh set of eyes?
So you have to always look at a situation and put yourself in the other people's shoes and try to figure out what are the fulcrum components that are driving a situation. And so when we look at the situation, you couldn't equate the Israelis and the Palestinians. One was a democracy, one was a kleptocracy. One had a super powerful military. One was basically, just kind of it was kind of a con job at some point. And so we saw it for what it was, and we weren't trying to be balanced. We were trying to be honest. And I think that really was distorting for a lot of people. So we saw that the whole Palestinian situation was they got billions of dollars of aid. It was never conditions based, and we basically said, U.S. foreign aid is not an entitlement. If we're going to give you this money, we want to see certain things happen. And so we worked very hard over a couple of years to do certain things. And again, I give President Trump tremendous credit for what he did, because when he moved the embassy, I take people into the Situation Room and how he had opposition from Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the intel community said World War III would occur. And what he basically did was he calibrated all the different advice. He made a very measured decision, decided to go forward with it despite the advice of everyone that it was going to cause war. He tasked me with reaching out to all the different leaders and saying, look, you can't cherry pick your relationship with America. We're helping you with Iran. We're helping you with military. We're helping you with economy. Don't mess around with this. And so he made the decision. Everyone said the world was going to end. And then what happened was the next morning the sun rose, the next evening the sun set, and life moved on, and it was done. And the same thing happened with the Iran deal. So President Trump was starting to realize that certain variables that people thought were fixed were actually fluid. And I give many examples in the book of these interactions and how we moved around all these different elements in order to create the opportunity for people to see the Israeli-Palestinian issue for what it really was, and to see that it really was about leadership trying to stay in power so they could maintain the flow of funds that they had. And they had no interest in making the lives of their people better. I believe that the job of a leader is, number one, to keep their people safe, and number two, to give them an environment where they can have opportunity to better their lives and their children's lives and have hope and excitement for the future. And the Palestinian leadership was not doing that.
In your book, we're talking to Jared Kushner in his book, Breaking History, a White House Memoir. You talk about one of the things that you were doing was, and totally makes sense, you united the Middle East because you recognized the common foe was Iran. And that kind of brought people together. And when your dad, or when your father-in-law, the president, got out of the Iran, the stupid, dangerous Iran peace deal, that made a difference. How much of a role did that play, and what does it mean that we are sitting down at the table with Iran now?
So the first deal in 2014 was probably one of the worst transactions ever done, maybe in the history of diplomacy, and it just made absolutely no sense. Iran was on a glide path to a nuclear weapon. They had gotten $150 billion in funds that were basically now they were using to fund Hezbollah, Hamas, all these different people. They were chanting death to America, death to Israel. It made absolutely no sense. But what it did is it kind of scared the crap out of all of the Arab countries to say, okay, this could be that bad. And actually, when we got there, they were starting to rebuild their relationship with China and saying, look, when America went and did the deal with Persia, we were thinking we had to teach our kids Chinese because America was not dependable anymore. And we said, wait, guys, wait a minute, calm down here. These relationships that we've had with you guys have been longstanding, many, many decades. We agree that what happened here was terrible, but let's figure out a rational policy. And what we did is we reimposed sanctions on Iran. We took their oil exports down from 2.6 million barrels a day to 100,000. We really dissected their economy, and they were out of foreign currency reserves, and we stopped. And what Trump used to say about Iran is that they never won a war, but they've never lost a negotiation. And so he figured out how to really create a better condition than what we inherited. And we really tried to give the incoming administration a much stronger hand, which was only buttressed by the fact that we had Iraq much more stable than when we got there. ISIS caliphate was eliminated. And now we had the Abraham Accords. So all the way from Haifa, our goal is to try to create a place of security from Haifa to Muscat in Oman, and then get economic connectivity between it all to basically show the Iranian people that there would be the opportunity for you to live a better life if you join into this. So instead of following, again, we had 6 peace deals in the last 6 months. I write about how we made those occur. Instead, the administration runs and goes back to Iran on their knees begging to make the old stupid deal. And so it makes no sense to me. But again, I think that what you'll see in this book is that we came with an outsider's perspective. We tried to bring common sense. And again, we really broke the mold on a lot of issues and did things contrary to what people who were the conventional thinkers in Washington did, and why they did those things for decades before we got there. I didn't understand, and why they're going back to some of these things now that we've seen that these policies that were different are working. It makes absolutely no sense.
We are going to be short on time, so there's so many questions I'd like to ask you. For instance, if you would have thrown in bad stuff about President Trump, you would have made a fortune, and the left would have loved you and left you alone. And you didn't do it. Congratulations.
Yeah, I've learned that the love of the left is something that is it's not worth what people think it is. I see people contorting themselves and saying certain things that they don't believe or not saying certain things that they believe. But the left has no loyalty. They turn on you in a second. And I think it's much better to say the truth. And look, I do think that being in the White House, I saw so much information asymmetry in terms of how we were covered, what we did. But again, there was two currents in this book that I tried to capture happening at the same time. One was that we were under relentless attacks, being accused of collusion with Russia and treason, and then impeached for trying to investigate corruption in Ukraine and attacked by the media. And I tried to show what it was like living through all of that, while also getting all these things done, right? When President Trump, in office, we had inflation was low, gas prices were low, wages were rising, the wealth gap was shrinking. We had peace in Europe, we had peace with China. We were making great deals. We had them on their back foot. And that didn't all happen by accident. And so I tried to take people inside the room and the trade deals, the negotiations with President Putin, the negotiations with King Salman, the negotiations with President Xi, and how Trump used his unusual style in order to achieve these outcomes. And at the end of the day, I find a lot of my friends who are on the left, they hyperventilate over different things that Trump will say or how they perceive it. But I think that results matter. And I want people to understand how those results were achieved. And it's been very disheartening for me to watch how, again, you put the government bureaucrats back in charge and inflation is rising. We have a war in Europe. China's, being provocative with Taiwan. North Korea is firing off weapons. I write in here about how Trump was able to create the relationship with Kim Jong-un and going to the DMZ, how he walked into North Korea. Nobody knows how that came about and how it almost didn't happen many, many times. And so I wanted people to really understand how he did the things and why him being the way he is, empowered by and working with the right people around him, enabled him to accomplish so much.
Your book is fascinating, and it really is a thriller. All of the things you just laid out, it's a thriller. Let me ask you one thing, because there's parts of the book that get very, very personal, and one of my favorite parts is when you talk about your grandma, and we've only got about 2 minutes. Your grandmother was 16 when the Nazis invaded Poland. Your family went from ghettos to mansions in 3 generations, which is remarkable. Can you talk a little bit what your grandmother went through and how that affected you with the Abrahamic Accords?
Sure. So my grandparents were both in Belarus, and then the Nazis came in. My grandmother, I write about how in her town they took 50 of the educated Jews, they shot them in the head, the Nazis, and then they made the young women, like my grandmother, clean the blood off of the stones while they had other Jews playing instruments to celebrate it. It was a brutal experience. They joined the resistance fighters in the woods. They were out of a town of 10,000, 250 that escaped, and then ultimately they got married in Hungary. They came over to America on a boat. I write about how my grandfather went to New Jersey. He was a carpenter. He said he was afraid of heights, so he couldn't work in the buildings in Brooklyn. So they said, go to New Jersey. They have shorter buildings there. and it's just an amazing American story. And so I try to take people through that very quickly. But I'll say that for me, again, what I saw working in the White House, going from the grandson of refugees, is that America is an absolute amazing country. It's a place with incredible opportunity. We have amazing people. And what President Trump tried to do with the administration was to allow for the American dream to be prevalent, allow for it to be deep, to give everyone equal opportunity. And I think that's what our policies did. And for me to be able to work on the Abraham Accords as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, I talk about my interactions with the Germans, where I was actually very disappointed with the lack of enthusiasm and the lack of engagement that they had with us, given that, the whole plight that we still have in the Middle East. I explained how it really is a remnant of the post-World War II anti-Semitism that existed because of the Holocaust and because of the Nazis. And so I just think that it was an amazing honor to do it. And I say it is an extraordinary story. And I really, I believe that God has his hand in everything we do. I'm very, very big believer in that, and just very, very grateful for all these experiences. And again, a lot of it was very difficult. I write in the first year about how I had to adjust. I was surrounded by a lot of complicated people, but I go through the lessons I learned, and I was trying to give people who have never served in Washington, who obviously have followed the Trump administration, who follow politics, a real insight into what it's like to serve in Washington, what it's like to work in the White House, and what it's like to kind of navigate, and all the lessons I learned, so that hopefully businessmen will continue to go and serve in government, so we don't have the career political class that often is trying to keep power as opposed to make people's lives better.
Jared Kushner. The name of the book is Breaking History. If you don't know, where have you been? He was a former senior advisor to President Trump. And this book is really a thriller to see from the inside what was going on and how they did the things that they did. By the way, you were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Please tell me you didn't lose it to, like, Greta Thunberg. Or...
No, I lost it to a journalist who nobody's ever heard of, who did something, I guess. But I guess they created more peace than we did.
Yeah, so it's crazy.
But, it's the peace is the prize, and I see every day. I get people send me pictures of Israeli fruit being sold in Emirati supermarkets, or of new flights, or of new business deals being done, and really reuniting Israelis and Muslims. It's just Jews and Muslims in the Middle East. It's such a beautiful thing, and so the dividends from this is paying forever in terms of the positivity that it's unleashed.
Well, I think it was truly a miracle. I agree with you. God was in the center of that, and I can't thank you enough. Jared Kushner, author of the book Breaking History.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.